There comes a moment in life when the empath finally feels the weight of the mask they've been wearing. It is the mask of endless forgiveness. For years, they've smiled, nodded, and whispered, "It's okay," even when it wasn't. Not because love demanded it, but because fear insisted on it. Fear of losing someone, fear of being abandoned, fear of being labeled unkind or unworthy. Carl Jung called this moment of awakening a collision with the shadow. It is when everything you've suppressed for the sake of survival comes rushing into the light. And it is not gentle. It shakes you. It exposes the truth that your forgiveness was never pure compassion. More often, it was survival dressed as virtue. You see, many empaths learned early that their value depended on their ability to carry pain silently. They were taught, not through words, but through patterns, that peace was their responsibility. That harmony came only if they absorbed the storm of others and held it without complaint. Over time, this becomes second nature. The smile, the soft yes, the constant soothing of wounds that were never theirs to heal. And with every repetition, the mask grows tighter until they no longer know where it ends and where they begin. But something happens when the mask cracks. At first, it feels like rage. Not the explosive rage of destruction, but the quiet, sacred rage of a soul saying, "No more." This is not cruelty. This is clarity. It is the sound of the authentic self stirring after years of silence. Jung understood that real transformation begins here, not in imagining light, but in making the darkness conscious. For the empath, that darkness isn't evil. It's their own suppressed instinct for self-preservation. The part of them that always knew when they were being used, but was forced into exile by the need to be good. When they stop forgiving automatically, that part begins to return. They discover boundaries they never honored before. They feel anger that had been buried for decades. And slowly, they realize that these aren't flaws. They are forms of wisdom. It's like a river that has been dammed for too long. The water behind it grows restless, heavy, dangerous. But when the dam breaks, the river doesn't destroy. It flows. It finds its natural course again. In the same way, when empaths stop holding back the truth of their own needs, they don't become cruel. They become whole. This awakening changes everything. Relationships built on self-sacrifice begin to fall apart because they were never truly mutual to begin with. Manipulation that once passed unnoticed now shines under the light of awareness. Guilt, which used to hold so much power, begins to dissolve when recognized for what it truly is: a tool to control. The empath, once endlessly forgiving, now steps into discernment. They begin asking, is this mine to carry? Does this truly serve love? Or does it simply serve control? And as they shift, something remarkable happens. The masks fall, not only from others, but from themselves. Those who once wore kindness as a disguise for exploitation can no longer hide. Emotional vampires lose interest because the energy they once fed on is no longer available. But most surprising of all, the empath sees their own reflection clearly for the first time. They recognize that endless forgiveness was not love. It was fear. And that recognition, though painful, is liberation. Because from this place, forgiveness itself is reborn. No longer automatic, no longer cheap, no longer given to bypass truth. Instead, it becomes conscious forgiveness. A forgiveness that honors the wound, acknowledges the boundary, and still chooses not to live in resentment. It is forgiveness that includes justice, forgiveness that requires truth-telling, forgiveness that comes not from fear of loss, but from fullness of heart. When this shift takes place, energy that was once drained into endless apologies and one-sided relationships becomes available again. Available for creativity, for dreams long deferred, for connections that are mutual, nourishing, and alive. Jung called this individuation the privilege of a lifetime to become who you truly are. And for the empath, becoming who you truly are means no longer carrying the world on your shoulders, but walking beside it as an equal. Imagine a lighthouse. It doesn't chase ships across the sea, desperately trying to save them. It simply stands steady and bright. It offers its light freely, but it does not abandon itself in the process. That is what the awakened empath becomes, a light that shines consciously without being consumed. So, if you are listening and you recognize yourself in these words, I want you to know this stopping the cycle of endless forgiveness does not make you hard. It makes you real. It does not make you less loving. It makes you capable of true love. Love with boundaries. Love with truth. Love with integrity. The world doesn't need more empaths who disappear behind masks. The world needs empaths who can love consciously, who can say no when no is required, who can forgive when the soul is ready, not when fear demands it. Because when you stop forgiving automatically, every mask falls away, and in that sacred unmasking, your authentic self finally steps into the light. 1. The liberating truth. There comes a point when the empath discovers something so simple and yet so revolutionary that it changes the course of their life. They realize that love, real love, does not demand blind sacrifice, and forgiveness, real forgiveness, does not require self-betrayal. For years, forgiveness may have felt like a duty, a reflex, something you offered not because it was true for you, but because it was expected. Perhaps you smiled and whispered, "It's fine," when it wasn't fine at all. Perhaps you took responsibility for another's pain while quietly abandoning your own. You thought that by forgiving quickly, by smoothing things over, you were keeping the peace. But what you were really keeping was the mask. Jung observed that so much of our behavior is driven by fear disguised as virtue. For the empath, endless forgiveness often springs not from compassion, but from terror, terror of conflict, terror of abandonment, terror of being labeled unkind. Deep down, you may have believed that your worth was tied to your ability to endure, to absorb pain silently, to offer grace before truth had even been spoken. But when you stop forgiving automatically, something shifts. The air feels different. The ground beneath your feet steadies. You realize that forgiveness is not the first step. It is the last. It is not what you give to avoid confrontation. It is what you choose after truth has been acknowledged, justice has been honored, and boundaries have been restored. Only then does forgiveness free you, because it no longer asks you to lie to yourself. This realization is liberating. It is as if a weight you have carried for decades suddenly falls from your shoulders. You see clearly that love is not measured by how much you can lose of yourself, but by how deeply you can honor both yourself and the other in equal measure. Forgiveness, then, becomes an act of integrity. It comes from wholeness, not from wounding. Think of it this way: if a wound is still open and bleeding, placing a bandage on top without cleaning it is not healing. It is denial. The infection festers underneath. In the same way, when you forgive without truth, without justice, without boundaries, you do not heal. You cover over the wound, but it continues to ache inside. Conscious forgiveness is different. It says, I see the wound. I tend to it. I allow time for it to close. And only when it has healed do I release the resentment that no longer serves me. This kind of forgiveness is not about the other person. It is about you. It is about refusing to live chained to bitterness, while also refusing to abandon your own dignity. It is about choosing when the soul is ready, not when fear insists. And this is where the deeper spiritual truth begins to emerge. Because when you forgive consciously, you are no longer moving from the energy of lack, You are not forgiving to keep someone close, or to avoid conflict, or to prove you are good. You are forgiving because you are already whole, because your essence cannot be touched by betrayal, because you have made peace with the truth. And from that peace, forgiveness becomes natural. I remember a time when I confused forgiveness with erasure. I thought that to forgive meant to pretend it never happened, to wipe the slate clean, even if the ink of the wound was still fresh. But over time, I realized that forgiveness without truth is not forgiveness. It is abandonment of the self. And every time I abandoned myself, I grew more hollow. The light inside dimmed, not because it was gone, but because I was burying it under layers of self-denial. The liberating truth is this: real forgiveness shines light on the wound. It does not hide it. It allows accountability. It respects consequences. It honors justice. And then, only then, does it release the resentment that would otherwise poison your soul? This truth may sound simple, but living it is transformative. Because once you learn it, you can no longer be manipulated by guilt. You no longer feel compelled to excuse behavior that violates your soul. You no longer confuse compliance with compassion. Instead, you live from alignment. And alignment is freedom. From a quantum perspective, you could say that this is a shift in vibration. When you forgive out of fear, you remain entangled with the frequency of victimhood. You continue to resonate with those who feed on your silence. But when you forgive from wholeness, your field changes. You are no longer a match for exploitation, because your energy is tuned to dignity, clarity, and truth. It's like tuning a radio. If you are set to a frequency of lack, you will always pick up stations that broadcast lack. But when you shift your dial to sufficiency, you begin to hear a different song. The people who once thrived on your endless forgiveness no longer find resonance with you. They fade. While those who honor your authenticity are drawn closer. The liberating truth is not only for you, it ripples outward. When you forgive consciously, you model a new way of being. You show others that love can be strong, that compassion can coexist with boundaries, that forgiveness can include truth, and in doing so, you give permission for others to release their masks too. So, if you find yourself standing at that crossroads, tired of forgiving out of obligation, tired of carrying pain that isn't yours, I want you to know this. You are not cruel for saying enough. You are not unloving for refusing to pretend. You are reclaiming the sacredness of forgiveness. You are choosing to love in truth, to forgive in freedom, and to honor your soul above the fear of disapproval. And when you do, you discover something extraordinary. The world does not collapse when you stop forgiving automatically. The relationships that were built on exploitation may fall away. Yes, but in their place, authentic connections are born. Connections where forgiveness is rare, because respect and truth are present from the beginning. This is the liberating truth. You were never meant to bleed yourself dry in the name of love. You were meant to shine in the fullness of who you are. And from that fullness, to offer forgiveness only when your soul is ready. Anything less is not love. It is fear, and you are no longer bound to fear. 2. Sacred rage. There comes a point in the life of every empath when the quiet whisper of their soul grows into a roar. For years, they have smiled through the hurt, softened their words, and swallowed their truth to keep the peace. But one day, something breaks. Not in a destructive way, but in a life-saving way. They stand taller, their voice steadies, and they say the words they once thought they never could. Enough. This is not the kind of rage that burns everything in its path. It is not the blind fury that lashes out to wound others. This is something far more profound. This is sacred rage. The fire that does not destroy, but refines. The flame that does not consume, but clarifies. For too long, empaths have been taught to fear their anger, To believe that feeling, it makes them unloving, selfish, or cruel. They were told that good people don't get angry, and so they buried it, deep within, where it smoldered quietly like coals waiting for air. But anger does not vanish simply because we suppress it. It waits, it lingers, and when the time is right, it rises, not to harm, but to heal. Sacred rage is the moment an empath looks directly at all they have tolerated, all they have allowed, and recognizes the truth. It is the moment they realize that their endless forgiveness was not love, but self-abandonment. That the peace they thought they were keeping was really silence in the face of exploitation. And in that moment of recognition, the anger that erupts is not cruelty. It is clarity. Think of a blacksmith working with metal. The fire is not there to destroy the steel. It is there to temper it, to give it strength, to make it unbreakable. In the same way, sacred rage does not strip the empath of their compassion. It tempers it. It gives it backbone. It forges it into something sustainable. For the first time, anger becomes an ally. It rises to say, your boundaries matter. Your needs are real. Your soul deserves respect. It is not the opposite of love. It is love turned inward. Love refusing to abandon itself again. I remember when I first felt this shift in myself. For years, I believed being loving meant absorbing the blows, enduring the manipulation, excusing the patterns. I thought love meant always understanding, always forgiving, always carrying more than my share. But eventually, the weight became too much. And one day, the words came out, not in a scream, but in a calm and steady voice. No, this ends here. That no was sacred. It did not come from hatred. It came from love. Love for my own soul. Love for my own dignity. Love for the truth that had been silenced too long. And in that moment, I realized anger was not pulling me away from love. It was guiding me back to it. Sacred rage becomes the fire that lights the path to boundaries. Without it, empaths often continue in cycles of exploitation, mistaking endurance for virtue. With it, they finally have the courage to draw the line, to protect what is sacred, to honor themselves as much as they honor others. It becomes the guardian of compassion, ensuring that kindness is no longer given at the cost of self-destruction. From a spiritual perspective, you might say, sacred rage is the awakening of the shadow. Jung taught that enlightenment does not come from imagining light, but from making the darkness conscious, and anger, long suppressed, is part of that shadow. When it rises, it is not evil. It is the forgotten protector returning home. It is the part of you that knows your worth and refuses to let you forget it again. In quantum terms, you could think of it as an energetic recalibration. For years, your vibration may have been set to compliance, resonating with those who fed on your silence. But when sacred rage awakens, your frequency shifts. It signals to the universe, I will no longer resonate with exploitation. I will only align with love that honors me. 2. And the field responds. The takers fall away, and those capable of real connection begin to appear. Sacred rage does not erase empathy. It purifies it. It takes love out of the realm of compulsion and into the realm of choice. No longer do you give because you are afraid of losing someone. You give because your heart is full. No longer do you forgive to avoid conflict. You forgive when your soul is ready. No longer do you love to prove your worth. You love because you know your worth is already whole. And so, if you feel anger rising within you now, I want you to know it is not something to fear. It is not a sign you are losing your kindness. It is a sign you are reclaiming it. It is the fire that burns away the lies you once told yourself. It is the heat that forges the steel of your soul. Sacred rage is not the end of your compassion. It is the beginning of your authenticity. It is the voice of your soul saying, I am done betraying myself in the name of love. I am ready to love in truth. So let the fire come. Let it rise. Let it tell you where the lines must be drawn, where the doors must be closed, where the healing must begin. And then let it settle into embers that keep your heart warm, steady, and strong. Because when you honor your sacred rage, you discover something extraordinary. You have not lost your light. You have protected it. You have not abandoned love. You have deepened it. And from this place, your empathy is no longer fragile. It is fierce. It is conscious. And it is free. 3. Survival forgiveness. There is a kind of forgiveness that does not rise from love, but from fear. For many empaths, this has been the invisible thread woven through their lives. They forgive too quickly, too often, not because their heart is overflowing with compassion, but because their survival seems to depend on it. From a young age, some learned that harmony was fragile. Perhaps they grew up in households where anger simmered under the surface, where conflict could erupt at the smallest spark, and so, forgiveness became a reflex. "I'm sorry," they whispered before they had even done anything wrong. "It's okay," they said when their boundaries were crossed. In truth, it wasn't okay. But to admit that felt dangerous. Carl Jung described this as the sacrifice of the authentic self in exchange for acceptance, to belong, to be safe, to be loved. The empath learned to betray their own feelings. To stay connected, they had to disconnect from themselves. And over time, this reflex became their mask. A mask of endless understanding, a mask of infinite patience, a mask that slowly suffocated the soul beneath it. It looks noble from the outside. People admire the empath's tolerance, their ability to let things go. But inside, it is not virtue. It is exhaustion. Survival forgiveness is not an act of strength. It is an act of fear, dressed up to look holy. Fear of abandonment, fear of conflict, fear of being judged as unworthy of love. I remember this stage in my own life. I believed that forgiving quickly made me strong. I thought it was proof of my capacity to love. But if I was honest, it wasn't love I was protecting. It was the connection. It was the illusion of safety. I forgave, not because my soul was ready, but because I was terrified of what would happen if I didn't. This is the tragedy of survival forgiveness. It seems to keep the peace, but it does so by waging war against the self. Every time you silence your truth, a part of you fades. Every time you excuse what cuts you, your soul bleeds quietly beneath the surface. And though no one else can see it, you feel the ache deep within, the slow erosion of your spirit. But here is the paradox. That same system of forgiveness that once kept you alive eventually begins to collapse. You reach a point where the mask is too heavy, the dissonance too great. Your body rebels. Anxiety rises. Depression sets in. Your voice, though long silenced, begins to tremble with the urge to speak. And when you finally stop forgiving out of fear, the whole structure begins to fall apart. It is terrifying, yes, because without survival forgiveness, you risk losing the very connections you once fought to preserve. But what you discover is that those connections were never real in the first place. They were built on your silence, your sacrifice, your disappearance. And anything that requires you to betray yourself to sustain it is not love. It is dependence. When the collapse comes, something beautiful follows. You realize that forgiveness is not supposed to be reflexive. It is not supposed to be automatic. It is not meant to erase the truth before the truth has been spoken. Real forgiveness is deliberate. It requires honesty. It requires accountability. It requires boundaries. It is not given to keep someone close. It is offered when your soul is ready to let go. This is the turning point. The moment you begin to reclaim your authentic self, for the first time, you may say, "No, I cannot forgive this yet." Not until the truth is acknowledged, Not until I have honored my own pain. And though those words may feel foreign, they are the language of liberation. It is like a tree that has been bent for years under a heavy weight. At first, bending is what kept it from breaking. But eventually, the weight crushes its ability to grow. Only when the weight is removed can the tree straighten again. In the same way, survival forgiveness may have protected you once, but to keep living under it is to deny your growth. From a quantum perspective, survival forgiveness locks you into the frequency of fear. It keeps you entangled with those who thrive on your silence. But the moment you release it, your vibration shifts. You begin to resonate with truth, with dignity, with authenticity, and suddenly, the field around you changes. The people who once depended on your quick forgiveness fall away, and those who honor your honesty begin to appear. This is not easy. It requires courage. It requires sitting with discomfort, perhaps for the first time. But on the other side of that discomfort lies freedom. Because when you forgive consciously, not to survive, but to thrive, you align with love in its truest form. Survival forgiveness taught you how to endure. Conscious forgiveness will teach you how to live. And in that shift, the empath is no longer a victim of their own goodness. They become a sovereign being, capable of love without losing themselves. So if you find yourself forgiving out of fear, I want you to pause, to breathe, to ask, am I forgiving because my heart is ready, or because I am afraid of what will happen if I don't? That simple question can change everything. And when the answer is ready, let it be honest. Let it be whole. Let it be true. Because only then does forgiveness stop being survival and start being liberation. 4. 8 signs of the sacred rebellion. There comes a moment when the empath, long bound by silence and sacrifice, begins to awaken. It is not a sudden explosion, nor is it an outward rebellion that seeks to destroy. It is quieter, more intimate, yet no less powerful. Carl Jung recognized this as a sacred rebellion, the uprising of the authentic self, after years of dormancy. And when it comes, it does not arrive as theory. It shows itself in lived signs, concrete shifts that ripple through every part of life. The first sign is the end of energy leaks. For so long, you may have felt constantly tired, not because your body was weak, but because your soul was leaking energy into battles that weren't yours. Every sigh, every unspoken yes when you meant no, every absorbed emotion drained you. But then one day, you notice the shift. You stop carrying emotions that are not yours. You return them gently to where they belong. And suddenly, you feel lighter. The exhaustion that once defined you begins to lift, because your life force is no longer flowing out through cracks of unconscious giving. The second sign is that the social mask falls. For years, you may have smiled even when you were hurting, said, "I'm fine" when you were anything but. That mask protected you, but it also trapped you. In the sacred rebellion, you stop pretending. You allow yourself to be seen in your truth. Tears come without shame. Silence is honored without apology. And joy bursts forth without being muted. People around you may be startled at first, but the ones who truly love you will recognize that this honesty is not a withdrawal of love. It is the arrival of your real self. The third sign is the unveiling of manipulation, where once you were entangled in webs of guilt trips, subtle gaslighting, and emotional games. Now, you see them clearly. The patterns you once excused or minimized are revealed for what they are, tools of control. This clarity is not born of cynicism, but of awakened sight. You no longer confuse intensity with intimacy, or chaos with connection. You see the strings, and because you see them, they no longer bind you. The fourth sign is immunity to false guilt. Once, guilt was the leash others used to pull you back into compliance. They relied on your soft heart to carry burdens that weren't yours, to apologize when you had nothing to be sorry for. But now, that spell breaks. You recognize guilt as information, not identity. If you have truly harmed, guilt calls you to repair. But if guilt arises simply because you set a boundary or spoke your truth, you let it dissolve. It loses its power over you, like smoke that fades when the fire is gone. The fifth sign is the filtering of relationships. As you change, the connections around you shift. Those who thrived on your silence may grow uncomfortable and drift away. Those who loved you only when you bent may leave when you stand tall. It can feel like loss, but it is actually refinement. The people who remain are those who honor your wholeness. They don't demand your mask. They celebrate your essence. And in their presence, you feel nourished instead of drained. The sixth sign is that anger transforms into sacred protection. No longer a force you fear, anger becomes the flame that guards your boundaries. It tells you when something is off, when a line has been crossed, when your dignity is being tested. Instead of suppressing it or letting it explode, you harness it. You let it inform you. You allow it to guide you into clarity. And in doing so, anger ceases to be destructive and becomes deeply healing. The seventh sign is heightened intuition, freed from the fog of denial. Your inner sight sharpens. You begin to notice patterns, cycles, unspoken dynamics that were invisible before. You see the repetition of apology without change, the loop of hurt, regret, repeat. And because you see it, you no longer step into it. This intuition is not magical thinking. It is awareness refined through suffering. It is your soul. Weser now, whispering, you know this story. Choose differently this time. And finally, the eighth sign, the authentic self emerges. Beneath the layers of masks, beneath the years of compromise, the real you steps forward. Not the self sculpted by others' expectations, but the one you abandoned long ago to survive. This self is grounded, radiant, unapologetic in its presence. It does not beg for approval. It does not barter its worth. It simply is, whole, alive, and free. These 8 signs are not random changes. They are not minor shifts. They are the evidence of rebirth. Each one is like a petal unfolding, revealing a deeper truth of who you are. Together, they mark the end of survival and the beginning of sovereignty. When you notice them in yourself, you may feel both grief and joy. Grief for the years lost to silence, for the love wasted on manipulation, for the energy poured into illusions. But joy, too, joy that you have awakened, joy that you are no longer asleep in your own life, joy that you finally stand in the light of your truth. This is the sacred rebellion. It is not about fighting others. It is about reclaiming yourself. It is about refusing to betray your soul any longer. It is about rising, not against the world, but for your own life. So if you feel these signs stirring in you, the lifting of exhaustion, the fall of the mask, the return of your authentic self, know this: you are not breaking down. You are breaking through. You are not becoming harder. You are becoming whole. And from this wholeness, you will love more deeply, more wisely, more freely than ever before. 5. The wider ripple. When an empath finally stops forgiving automatically, it is not just their own life that changes. The shift goes far beyond personal healing. It alters the unspoken agreements in their relationships. It changes the very rhythm of how others move around them. Because when compassion is no longer endless and unconditional in the face of harm, people have no choice but to reveal who they truly are. For years, many learned to wear masks because they knew the empath would always forgive, always smooth things over, always carry more than their share. The mask of charm, the mask of remorse, the mask of false vulnerability. All of it was sustained by the guarantee of endless pardon. But when that guarantee is withdrawn, the truth emerges. Without the shield of infinite forgiveness, people must either grow or leave. This is not cruelty. This is clarity. It is the moment the empath realizes that their tolerance has been the soil in which unhealthy dynamics grew. And when that soil changes, the weeds can no longer survive. The first ripple of this awakening is exposure. Manipulation becomes visible. Words that once carried power lose their grip. The cycle of harm followed by hollow apology no longer repeats endlessly. Instead, it collapses. The person who once relied on your silence now stands in the light of accountability. They must face their own shadow, because you are no longer carrying it for them. The second ripple is refinement. Relationships that were built on your absence begin to dissolve, while relationships built on truth begin to thrive. Those who only valued your endless forgiveness may leave, and though their departure can feel like loss, it is actually freedom. What remains are those who respect your boundaries, who honor your dignity, who value your presence without demanding your disappearance. The third ripple extends outward into community. Every boundary you set, every mask you refuse to support, becomes an invitation for others to do the same. People watching you, friends, family, even strangers, begin to sense that something has shifted. They see that you are no longer drained, no longer apologizing for existing, no longer complicit in your own erasure. And something inside them stirs. If they can live like this, maybe I can too. It is a silent but powerful form of leadership. You do not need to preach or persuade. Your life itself becomes the message. The simple act of living with boundaries, of refusing to forgive unconsciously, of insisting on truth, sends ripples through the collective field. It begins to rewrite the rules for what love looks like, for what respect requires, for what wholeness demands. Carl Jung spoke of this as individuation, the process of becoming who you truly are. But individuation is never just personal. When one person integrates their shadow, heals their wounds, and lives authentically, it shifts the collective unconscious as well. The empath's healing becomes more than private liberation. It becomes contribution to the awakening of humanity itself. I remember the first time I saw this ripple in my own life. When I stopped offering forgiveness as a reflex, a few people grew angry. They accused me of being selfish, of being cold. For a while, I carried doubt. Maybe they were right. Maybe I was losing my kindness. But over time, I noticed something else. The relationships that remained became deeper, more nourishing. People began speaking more honestly, listening more carefully, showing up more fully. The space once filled with manipulation was now filled with authenticity, and that authenticity spread, touching not just me, but everyone connected to us. This is the wider ripple, the realization that your healing is never just yours. Every time you refuse to enable harm, you challenge others to face themselves. Every time you honor your truth, you create a space where truth is valued. Every time you step out of silence, you encourage someone else to find their voice. In this way, the empath's awakening is not only survival, it is revolution. Quiet, steady, unshakable. A revolution that does not march in the streets, but moves through the invisible fabric of human connection. It is the rewriting of an ancient contract, the contract that said, "I will give until I disappear, and you will take until nothing is left." That contract ends here. Instead, a new agreement is born. I will honor myself, and in doing so, I will honor you. I will love in truth, not in denial. I will forgive when it is real, not when it is forced. I will no longer feed the illusion that harm has no consequence. And when enough empaths begin to live this way, the culture itself begins to shift. Families change, communities transform, generations heal. Children grow up watching adults who model respect, boundaries, and conscious love, and from them, they learn a different story. They learn that forgiveness is not weakness, but wisdom, that love is not sacrifice, but truth, that dignity is not selfishness, but the soil in which compassion can actually grow. So if you are in this stage now, if you are just beginning to feel the ripple of your own awakening, I want you to trust it. Yes, it may cost you relationships. Yes, it may bring conflict where there once was silence. But remember, silence was never peace. It was only the absence of truth. And truth, once spoken, always sets something free. Your healing is not selfish. It is sacred, and the ripples of it will reach further than you can imagine. 6. Conscious light. There comes a turning point in the empath's journey when giving is no longer a reflex of survival, but an act of intention. After years of offering forgiveness to avoid abandonment, after cycles of being drained by endless compassion, something changes. The empath begins to shine differently. Their light is no longer scattered, leaking into every corner. Dimmed by exhaustion, it becomes focused, conscious, radiant, not because it is bigger than before, but because it is finally their own. This is the emergence of conscious light. It is the moment an empath understands that their presence is sacred, and like all sacred things, it must be tended, guarded, and shared with discernment. They realize that shining does not mean burning themselves out. It means knowing when to open the doors of their heart and when to close them. It means giving with awareness, rather than spilling endlessly from a place of fear. In the past, the empath's light was like a lantern left on in the night, drawing anyone who wandered by. Some came with gratitude, warmed and comforted. Others came to consume, leaving the lantern dimmer each time. For years, the empath thought this was the cost of being loving, to be emptied again and again. But when awakening comes, the pattern breaks. They see clearly love does not require depletion. Light does not require destruction. To shine consciously is to choose where and how your energy flows. This is not selfishness. It is wisdom. Imagine a river. If it overflows without banks, it floods and destroys. But with boundaries, it nourishes everything it touches. In the same way, conscious light has edges, channels, direction. It gives life without losing itself. I remember when I first felt this shift in myself. For years, I gave because I didn't know how not to. I believed that to withhold even a drop of compassion was unkind. But slowly, I began to notice the difference between giving that felt alive and giving that left me hollow. One day, I said no, not with anger, but with calm, and instead of guilt, I felt peace. That peace was my first glimpse of conscious light. When the empath reaches this stage, their energy feels different to others as well. Those who once relied on endless tolerance no longer find a home in their presence. But those who value truth, reciprocity, and authenticity feel drawn closer. The field of the empath has changed. They are no longer resonating with lack, but with sufficiency, and sufficiency attracts sufficiency. Carl Jung might describe this as individuation, the emergence of the whole self. In quantum language, you could say their vibration has shifted, but in simple human terms, it is this: they are no longer giving to survive. They are giving because they are full. Conscious light also carries something else: inspiration. It is not just about the empath's healing. It ripples outward. When others witness someone who can be compassionate without being consumed, kind without being manipulated, radiant without being drained, it plants a seed. It whispers, "This is possible. You don't have to disappear to be loved. You don't have to break yourself to belong." And so, the empath becomes more than healed. They become a mirror for others, a living demonstration that sensitivity is not weakness, but strength refined. that boundaries do not kill love, but protect it. That light, when carried consciously, does not fade. It multiplies. Think of a lighthouse standing on the shore. It does not chase ships across the waves, exhausting itself, trying to save each one. It simply shines, steady and deliberate. The ships that seek guidance find it. The ships that ignore it pass by. Either way, the lighthouse remains whole. That is conscious light. And from this place, the empath steps into a new role. They are no longer merely survivors of their own story. They become agents of collective healing. By embodying conscious light, they shift the field around them. Their family changes. Their friendships change. Even the way strangers feel in their presence changes, not because they are doing more, but because they are being differently. This stage is not about perfection. The empath will still falter, still feel moments of guilt, still be tempted to fall into old patterns. But the difference now is awareness. They can catch themselves. They can pause. They can return to center. Their light is no longer unconscious. It is chosen. And that choice is powerful, because in choosing to shine consciously, the empath not only safeguards their own soul, they help awaken the souls around them. They prove that love can be fierce and gentle at the same time. They show that compassion and clarity can walk hand in hand. They live as reminders that light, when tended with wisdom, becomes not just personal healing, but collective hope. So if you find yourself arriving at this stage, know that it is not the end of your journey. It is the beginning of a new chapter. You are no longer just surviving the weight of your gift. You are wielding it with intention. You are no longer lost in the reflex of giving. You are alive in the choice of shining. And as you shine with consciousness, you will notice something extraordinary. The world responds differently, not because the world has changed, but because you have. The masks fall away, the truth takes root, and slowly, a new kind of love begins to grow. Love that is mutual, whole, and real. This is the gift of conscious light. Not only freedom for yourself, but a spark for the world. 7. Integrating the shadow. Carl Jung once wrote that we do not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. For the empath, this truth carries profound weight, because when they stop forgiving automatically, when they stop silencing themselves in the name of peace, they do not become cruel. They become whole. They begin to reclaim the shadow parts of themselves, the instinct to protect, the anger that clarifies, the boundaries that preserve dignity. For so long, empaths were taught to exile these parts. Anger was labeled dangerous. Self-protection was mistaken for selfishness. Boundaries were seen as walls that kept out love rather than gates that guided it. And so, these energies were pushed underground, hidden in the shadow, leaving the empath exposed, unguarded, and exhausted. But shadows do not disappear simply because we ignore them. They wait. They linger, shaping our lives in ways we do not see. They emerge in our bodies as tension, in our minds as anxiety, in our hearts as quiet, despair. And yet, these shadows are not enemies. They are allies waiting to be recognized. Integration begins when the empath realizes that anger is not the opposite of love. Anger is love's guardian. It rises to protect what is sacred, to defend dignity, to announce, "This is not acceptable." When anger is denied, it turns inward, corroding the soul. But when it is acknowledged and honored, it becomes the fire that illuminates truth. The same is true of self-protection. To shield yourself is not to abandon compassion. It is to recognize that compassion without safety cannot last. The instinct to protect your energy, your body, your spirit, this instinct is holy. It ensures that the love you offer is sustainable, rooted in strength rather than depletion. Boundaries. 2. Belong to the shadow. They have been misunderstood as rejection, but in reality, they are sacred lines that honor both self and other. A boundary says, I will meet you, but not at the cost of myself. I will love you, but not at the expense of truth. To integrate boundaries is to reclaim the right to exist fully, without apology. This integration is not an act of hardening. It is an act of softening into wholeness. Because what once felt like contradictions, love and anger, compassion and protection, openness and boundaries, are no longer at war. They become parts of the same self, each with a role to play. I remember when I first touched this integration in my own life. For years, I thought my kindness meant saying yes. Always. I thought my empathy meant absorbing the pain of others. Always. But beneath the surface, my body was screaming no. My soul was crying for space. When I finally allowed myself to listen, when I welcomed back the shadow I had rejected, I found something unexpected relief. My anger did not consume me. It steadied me. My boundaries did not isolate me. They freed me. My instinct to protect myself did not make me less loving. It made my love honest. This is the paradox Jung spoke of. The path to light does not bypass the dark. It passes through it. To imagine light without facing the shadow is to live half a life, wearing masks of goodness that never quite fit. But to bring the shadow into consciousness is to become authentic. It is to walk in the world without splitting yourself into acceptable and unacceptable parts. From a spiritual perspective, integration is a return to balance. In quantum terms, it is coherence. When frequencies once scattered and fragmented align into harmony, your energy field no longer leaks through unconscious denial. It becomes whole, steady, resilient. People around you feel the difference. They sense your compassion, yes, but they also sense your strength. They realize that your love is not naive. It is conscious. This integration also changes how you see others. When you have faced your own shadow, you no longer need to demonize the shadow in someone else. You see their anger not only as threat but also as pain. You recognize their defenses not only as cruelty but also as fear. This does not mean you excuse harm, but it means you can hold truth with compassion, boundaries with empathy. The empath who integrates their shadow becomes more than sensitive. They become wise. They no longer live in extremes, endlessly forgiving or endlessly bitter. Instead, they live in balance. They forgive when their soul is ready. They love without abandoning themselves. They say no without guilt, and yes, without fear. And perhaps most importantly, they discover peace. Because the war inside, between the self they showed the world and the self they buried, finally ends. The shadow is no longer exiled. It is embraced. And in that embrace, the empath becomes whole. So if you are in this stage, if you feel anger stirring, boundaries pressing, self-protection rising, I want you to know, you are not losing your light. You are reclaiming it. You are not becoming less loving. You are becoming fully alive. Integration is the sacred work of becoming. It is the remembering that you were never meant to be only half of yourself. You were meant to be all of it. The compassion and the fire, the softness and the strength, the light and the shadow. And when you live this way, you no longer need to imagine light. You embody it, not the fragile light of denial, but the steady flame of authenticity, a light that shines because it has nothing left to hide. The sacred restructuring, from darkness to conscious light. This journey is not a sentence handed down by life. It is not punishment for being too soft, too open, too forgiving. No, it is a sacred restructuring, a reweaving of the soul, where every broken thread is rewoven into something stronger, more luminous, more whole. Each stage you walk through was not random suffering. It was teaching, shaping, refining you into the person you are now becoming. The light trap taught you awareness. It showed you the cost of giving without boundaries, of shining without discernment. It asked you to look closely, to see clearly, to notice the difference between being needed and being valued. That painful lesson became the foundation of wisdom. The soul extraction taught you boundaries. It revealed where your life force was leaking, where your yes was betraying you, where your silence was slowly eroding your spirit. It called you to reclaim yourself, to gather your energy back into your own hands. The dark night taught you strength. When everything you thought was solid fell away, when every illusion burned down, you discovered a deeper ground beneath the collapse. You learned that the soul cannot be destroyed, that there is a center within you unshaken by any storm. The Phoenix rebirth taught you freedom. From the ashes of who you once were, you rose, not harder, not colder, but clearer. You learned that empathy can coexist with boundaries, that love does not require your disappearance, that you can give from fullness instead of emptiness. The lesson of resonant frequencies taught you that true love is never born of lack. It showed you that your vibration attracts your relationships, that resonance is the law of connection. When you lifted yourself from scarcity to sufficiency, you began to draw to you souls who could meet you as equals, not as consumers of your light. The conscious light taught you that you were not born merely to survive. You were born to shine, but not blindly, not endlessly, not recklessly, to shine with intention, to shine with wisdom, to shine in ways that nourish rather than deplete. You discovered that your light, when conscious, is not only your healing, it is a spark for the world. And finally, the integration of the shadow taught you wholeness. It reminded you that your anger is not your enemy, that your self-protection is not selfish, that your boundaries are not cruelty. It showed you that light without shadow is incomplete. To integrate both is to walk the world as an authentic being, nothing hidden, nothing to need. When you see the journey this way, the darkness no longer looks like a monster lurking at the edge of your life. It becomes a doorway, a stepping stone, a teacher disguised in pain. The darkness did not arrive to destroy you. It arrived to strip away what was false, to bring you home to what was true. I know, when you are in the middle of it, it doesn't feel that way. In the light trap, you may feel consumed. In the soul extraction, you may feel hollow. In the dark night, you may feel like nothing of you will remain. But I promise you, on the other side of each stage, something stronger waits, something more real, something that cannot be taken away. This is why I call it sacred restructuring, because life has not abandoned you. It has been reshaping you. It has been chiseling away at the illusions, the masks, the false versions of love, until only the authentic remained. And what remains is not fragile, it is luminous. What remains is not naive, it is wise. What remains is not empty, it is whole. So if you are listening now, standing somewhere along this path, maybe still in the exhaustion of endless forgiveness, maybe just entering the fire of anger, maybe still lost in the night, I want you to remember this. You are not being punished. You are being transformed. Every shadow you face, every boundary you draw, every truth you honor is part of the rebirth. And when the rebirth is complete, you will know something simple yet profound. You were not born only to endure. You were not born only to carry. You were not born only to forgive without limit. You were born to shine, consciously, truthfully, powerfully. And in that shining, you do more than free yourself. You inspire others. You shift the field around you. You remind those still lost in survival that there is another way, a way of living that is not about disappearing into love, but about becoming love itself. Awake, aware, whole. So let the darkness come. If it must, let it do its work. Do not fear it. It cannot destroy the essence of who you are. It can only strip away what you were never meant to carry. And when it has finished, when the masks have fallen and the ashes have cooled, you will step forward, not as the broken, but as the reborn. The truth is simple. You were not born just to love. You were born to love in awareness, to love without losing yourself, to love in a way that heals not only others, but also you. And when you live like that, the world becomes different. Not because the world has changed, but because you have. The darkness becomes your teacher, and the light, your conscious light, becomes your gift.